So I'm going to talk about the felling license process as Nuala has outlined there. And specifically I'm going to talk about applying for a license. And I know some of the Teagasc advisors had mentioned to me that there's some people have difficulties in terms of filling out a felling license form. It can be quite intimidating. But we have guidance notes here today and also available on the internet on the department's website that go through the process of completing a felling license application. I'm going to talk a little about something that we're going to introduce in regard to more sensitive environmental sites, the harvesting and reforestation plan, which is a little bit more detail about the method statement, if you like, of what's going to happen on a harvest site. Sometimes harvest sites are located adjacent or within, for example, Natura sites, that is special conservation areas or special protection areas for birds. And sometimes we need more information in order to follow through on the license in those instances. I'm going to talk a little about public consultation and appeals in regards to felling license, how the public can interact with the felling license process, and then in some instances how an owner might appeal a condition on a license, for example, or how a third party or member of the public might appeal a condition on a license, and just summarise. So applying for a felling license then requires some basic pieces of information like your name, address, and then I suppose more challenging to some people is the type of plot information and the area information. Now, people in the audience here familiar with BPS and their BPS application will, should have some confidence in filling out this information. So a lot of it is quite simple: the species name, the canopy percentage making up the area, the actual per hectare area, or the per hectare volume rather, which I'll go into subsequently, how you might estimate that. And then the operation year, the fell age, and then the estimated volume. So in terms of working out this information, how do I work out what volume is going to come out of my crop at a particular thinning? You can use what's referred to as the felling decision tool, which is available from the department's website. So this is like a series of little drop downs that if you log into the department's website, you can access this tool and it'll generate a table for you that'll show you information about your crop or give you an estimate about information about your crop so you can check it. So what you have to do is select the species, the yield class, the rotation type, the management prescriptions, and you can see the little question marks against each of the drop downs, and that explains what each of these things mean. So for example, yield class is a measure of productivity of the crop, and John talked about that earlier, but you can estimate the age and the plant year of the species and it'll generate a yield class for you if you don't know the yield class or don't know how to estimate it yourself. So the felling decision tool generates a little table and shows you from a financial perspective, based on the timber price for the last 5 years, what you're likely to expect in terms of an income per hectare from your forest crop. So you can use this tool to generate the information to populate your felling license. So it has the various volume information, stocking, that kind of thing. Again, I don't want to get too hung up on this, but we do have explanatory notes that go through these different parameters that you need to fill into the felling license. We also have another tool for individual tree volumes. Say, for example, you're talking about felling only a select number of trees. You can use this tool, which is also available from the department's website, to generate information on how much volume an individual tree would generate. And here you can see information entered in for Sitka spruce of DBH 30 centimetres and of a height of 22 metres, and you can see the associated volume is 0.7 cubic metres. So those tools are freely available to yourselves to help you complete your felling license application. So in terms of the reforestation information, quite similar. You fill in the area of each of the plots that you're going to replant. The reforestation objective. Now the reforestation objective, again, it's set out in the notes. that are guidance notes that accompany the felling license, and they are available from our website and here on the table. But we also have this felling and reforestation policy document that details these various reforestation objectives. And you can see the CF objective there is conifer forest for wood production, which most of you will be going back with if you are clear felling an area of spruce, for example, or it could be broadleaves, or it could be alternative alternative silvicultural systems, or even forest removal in some instances. Now, in the case of forest removal, we require alternative lands to replace the lands that you're taking out, if that's what you're opting to do. And I suppose in terms of the structure or how a plot would look post clear fell, in terms of the replanting, the layout of your replanting, you could see the conifer crop and your broadleaf component adjacent to the conifer crop, which would run alongside a river, for example. So in terms of the application maps that we require what's referred to as Discovery Series map. Most will be familiar with these maps. They're a scale of 1 to 25,000, which gives an outline of the area in question. And then an orthophoto map detailing the location of the two plots. You see, this is simple application with two conifer plots on the map. I mentioned earlier about the harvesting and reforestation plan, and in some instances, not in all instances, the Forest Service may need more information in regard to the operations that are planned and the reforestation operations subsequently. Now, obviously when we set about to go about the harvesting and reforestation operations, we want to minimise impacts associated with harvesting and reforestation. And the plan associated with these activities is best represented on a map, and then sometimes accompanied with a short written description. So when we, as part of the statutory licensing process, we have to refer some applications to third parties involved in the licensing process. So that could include the local authority, Parks and Wildlife Service, or inland fisheries. And as a general comment, foresters and forest owners understand the operations. They know what harvesting involves, but that mightn't be apparent to third parties like referral bodies or the Parks and Wildlife. They don't know what's actually going to happen on the ground when they receive an application from us in its normal form. This is why we will need a more detailed harvesting and reforestation plan. And you can see that's the draft plan. It's basically a two-paged plan with checkboxes and a small text description of what is actually happening on the site. Now, the harvesting plan allows us to fully interpret the felling license application and then make a robust recommendation in regard to issuing a license on that application. And it also allows the third parties that I mentioned earlier to fully understand what's happening on the ground in terms of the submitted license application. So this, if you recall the earlier harvest map, this is a harvest plan, so it would include a legend with some information on the legend, numbered plots, and then details such as the haulage routes, locations of streams, locations of the public roads, where your timber stacking areas, where your water crossing points are. So it's quite simple information, but it's very relevant to the licensing process, and particularly in regard to understanding potential environmental impacts, which most third parties are interested in. So I suppose photo is self-explanatory. What are the risks associated with harvesting? And one of the gentlemen outside spoke about what happens to all the branches that during the felling process or clear fell. You can see here we didn't have enough branches on the ground, and this is what resulted. So what normally happens is when a harvester moves across the harvesting site, they'll remove all the limbs of any trees and place them on the ground, and then the harvester and forwarder will drive over the brash material, as it's known, the lop on top, and that provides a surface for the vehicles to move over without damaging the soil structure. It's quite clear here that you're going to get a lot of, if there's a further heavy rainfall event, you're going to get maybe water running off and sedimentation of local water courses if there's any adjacent to the site. This is another site, I believe, in Wicklow, where again there was very heavy rutting, failure to maintain roadways and drains, and bad siting of a road, and basically the forwarder, as it was moving down the road, was pushing water over a bank down into a stream, causing a lot of damage. And of course, I believe in this case, the inland fisheries contacted us in regard to this harvest site, and we had to go down and investigate what happened and how this situation arose. This isn't a good example of best practice, obviously. Obviously, there's other risks associated with harvesting. Basically health and safety risks that need to be taken on board as well. You can see here good practice in regard to the use of brash. You see where the timber is stacked, and then the brash material on the ground that the harvester and forwarder will move over, which will ensure that there's very little soil disturbance. Another risk in regard to, I suppose one of the chief risks really in regard to harvesting activities is siltations of water courses, and the fact that there's existing drains in the forest may provide a pathway for water moving across or through a forest, particularly at harvest time. So we want to avoid these situations, avoid siltation wherever possible. And one of the ways we can do that is to put in structures such as temporary bridges. This is over the River Lickey in Waterford. I'm not sure if many of you know about the River Lickey, but it has populations of freshwater pearl mussel. And so this was a very sensitive site in regard to harvesting activity. I was on the site myself, and the landowner here, Quinto, went to great lengths to ensure that there would be no damage in terms of the aquatic environment there. This is an example of what's called a silt trap. Some of you may be familiar with this. This isn't a good example of a silt trap, and you can probably figure out why. What's going to happen if there's a big rainfall event? Simply the water is going to flow around the silt trap. It's not going to be functional. This is a silt trap. You see with the geotextile, it's very simple. It's essentially a barrier to slow down the movement of water and trap sediment so that it doesn't move into adjacent water courses. In terms of road infrastructure, just to clarify around felling, when we receive a license for a road application, the felling license for the areas of trees that you remove to build the road will not be required. This was introduced further through the new act. I suppose it's important to have the proper road infrastructure in place to reduce potential environmental risks from harvesting, proper timber stacking areas, and proper infrastructure to facilitate the removal of the timber without causing environmental damage. I mentioned this links in with I suppose the reforestation plan. Again, this is a similar map to the map I showed earlier, but focuses on the types of operations that will happen and reforestation. For example, the cultivation of the ground. You make a statement of what's happening where, what species are being replanted where. So the reforestation map and the harvest map in terms of the plans will be very similar. They'll represent the same areas, but you'll state what you'll do at the different times. In terms of the reforestation of a site, it's a time to put in measures to address maybe issues that weren't addressed in the first rotation, like implementing water setbacks to reduce the impact of operations in the forest into the future. So we maybe put in broadleaves planting adjacent to a waterway, or increase the setback from harvest areas. If you recall the pictures of the Lickey that I showed earlier, the trees were planted right up against the stream. So that site maybe was planted 45 years ago. It was the practice then to plant right up to the side of the stream. Today we have different practices, so we can correct those at the reforestation stage. In terms of site cultivation, we can put in mitigations. For example, you see a boulder there in one of the mound drains, and that slows the flow of water, which reduces sedimentation, so you don't get this deluge. If you do get a rain event, you don't get a deluge flowing through the drainage channel. You can see a large sediment trap here, which is basically just a big hole that again slows down the flow of water. And if any sediment is flowing here, once it hits the larger body of water, it will drop out into the bottom of the channel. This then to move on to public consultations and appeals and how that process works. So in terms of public consultation then, when a tree felling license is received by the department will publish a notice of that application on the department's website before making a decision on the matter. And the notice shall state that any person must make a submission within 30 days of the notification becoming available on the department's website. In terms of appeals then, when a felling license has been issued, there's a 28-day time limit for receipt of appeals. And this, from an operational point of view, this means that there's a 28-day holding period. So that gives members of the public or the owner or the licensee times to submit appeal. So, as I mentioned, an applicant can appeal either refusal to grant a license or a condition specified on a license, or third parties may also appeal the decision to grant a license or the conditions attached to a license. So, in summary then, moving on to the end, obviously the department, need clear and complete application forms in order to process licenses in a timely fashion. I've spoken a little about the harvest and reforestation plans that will be required in some instances where there's environmental sensitivities, like for example designated sites or sensitive catchments or streams or salmonid rivers or important breeding areas for particular fish species. We all know what's involved in thinning and felling. I mean, this is part of the exercise today, is to help new forest owners or existing forest owners come to better understanding of that. But third parties often don't know what felling, thinning operations involve. So we have to set out that information to them in some instances. So supplementary information in terms of, I spoke about, we have some of that information with us today in terms of the actual felling license itself, the guidance on filling out the license, our tree felling and reforestation policy document. What is the policy in regard to replanting lands, for example? The tree felling requirement note, it sets out the legal, very simply, the legal requirements on landowners in terms of tree felling, and then exempted tree felling information notes. So, for example, you would have heard the controversy in regard to the CIE, maybe at the start of this year, felling trees along railways. Well, the department doesn't have a licensing role in trees along railway lines, for example, so we wouldn't have a regulation role there. So that the exemption notes states those exemptions, and for landowners, there's a number of different exemptions that would impact upon them as well, where a landowner or a farmer doesn't need to have a license to fell a tree. Our contact details are listed here. In the felling section is based in Johnstown Castle, so if you have specific queries in regard to a felling license, you could ring up and check where, for example, where's my license, what's the status of my license, and you can also email the section, or the phone numbers there as well.